In World of Warcraft Classic, some of the game's most iconic and notorious villains dwell at the end of the world's darkest and deadliest dungeons across Azeroth. In Hardcore, these bosses tend to be some of the most dangerous that players will encounter, and they often end up taking many casualties every day. Some bosses are harder than others though, and this video today is here to discuss the 10 deadliest dungeon bosses in Hardcore Classic WoW. I will aim to rank and break down the 10 dungeon bosses that pose the biggest risk to hardcore players, where anything could go wrong at any time, and remember, this is just my opinion and everybody has different experiences in hardcore. With that being said, let's move on to the first entry. First up, in the undead side of Stratholme, we have the second to last boss, Ramstein the Gorger, a giant abomination. This boss is pretty straightforward and simple, but he can be pretty scary if you are not prepared. Ramstein's only mechanic is his ability Knockout, which will knock back and stun an enemy for 6 seconds. This is always going to hit the target with the most threat, so usually the tank will be hit by this. When he does hit your tank with Knockout, their threat will drop, causing Ramstein to go after the second highest player on threat. This can be very bad, especially for melee DPS, since he hits very hard and can almost one-shot pretty much anyone besides warriors with a critical hit. To counteract this, you either have to kite him away during the threat drop, have a second warrior to tank him, or stun him for the duration with something like a kidney shot, but not all stuns work. Once your tank gets aggro back, he is pretty easy to deal with, but the threat drop combined with the raw amount of damage that he can do makes him very scary to deal with sometimes. Next up, not too far away, is actually the last boss of Strat Undead, Baron Rivendare. This guy, similarly to Ramstein, hits extremely hard and will do a lot of damage even to the tank of your group. Rivendare has a few more mechanics than Ramstein, but most of them are manageable if you know what they are. First, he has an unholy aura that does ticking shadow damage around him, which your ranged DPS and healers can easily avoid by being in the corner of the room. Next, he has a shadow bolt, which does some decent shadow damage but isn't too bad, as well as a cleave, so only the tank should be in front of the boss or it can do some big damage. Then, a bigger issue is the skeletons that he spawns, which will usually go and attack the healer. But as long as you have a mage, then they shouldn't be that bad to deal with. If you don't have a mage though, if you don't kill them, they can cause chaos pretty quickly. Lastly, Rivendare has a Mortal Strike, which is where I usually see people die, since it does a lot of damage to the tank and will cut the healing they receive by half. Tanks will usually need to use a defensive cooldown of some sort, or else this Mortal Strike combined with a potential crit or two can easily kill a tank, which can sometimes lead to a complete wipe. Honestly, I don't think Rivendare seems too bad on paper, but I've seen a pretty substantial amount of deaths to this guy. I think it's primarily due to people underestimating his damage output. Following that, at 8th place is Lord Alexei Barov, one of the later bosses of the Skullman's dungeon. This guy, in my opinion, is the hardest boss in Skullman's due to a few reasons. First, the most obvious threat is the 2 skeletal bodyguards that accompany Lord Barov in his fight. These guys are normal elites that hit decently hard and can be CC'd with Shackle or Control Undead, but since there are 2, a healer priest will only be able to deal with one, so many groups won't be able to CC the other. The tank will have to be able to hold good threat on both the ad and the boss, or else it could turn sour if the healer gets aggro. Additionally, the boss has a ticking unholy aura, similar to Lord Rivendare, so the healer will have to deal with that while the tank is taking a potential ton of damage from the boss, the potential ad, and Barov's Immolate. This can be made even worse with the curse he applies called Veil of Shadow, which reduces incoming healing by 75%. So druids or mages will need to be there to decurse, or the tank can easily die with the curse applied to him. Basically, there's a lot of room for things to go wrong in this fight, and Lord Barov definitely warrants a lot of caution. Now, at the 7th spot, I decided to put Archmage Arugal, a definitely difficult boss, primarily for newer or inexperienced players. Arugal is the last boss of the Shadowfang Keep dungeon and has a few tricky weapons in his arsenal. First, his Void Bolts do a lot of damage for this level, and need to be line of sighted around walls and stairs in the room, or else can make your healer's job really difficult. Then he has a 5-second AoE stun around him, as well as the ability to teleport across the room, giving him more time to cast Void Bolts at you. Lastly, he can cast Arugal's Curse, which transforms a random party member into a Worgen for 10 seconds. These Worgen can be CC'd for the duration, and should be because they are hostile and they can do a lot of damage to the squishier members of your party. If your healer is the one to get cursed, then you will need to be ready to use potions or defensives, because a lot can go wrong quickly. Overall, Arugal has a lot of scary abilities compared to other dungeon bosses at this level, and his fight can easily spin out of control if your party is lacking either knowledge or substantial damage. If you are familiar with this fight, it is not a problem usually, but for some, it could turn out pretty bad for an early game boss. Next up, I chose the boss Antu'sul, located within Zul'Farrak. This guy is definitely the hardest boss in this dungeon, and is level 48, which is higher level than most of the dungeon as well. The first of Antu'Sul's mechanics is the healing and earth grab totems that he puts down, which need to be taken out quickly, but they aren't a huge issue. Then he has a heal, which is usually not too bad either. The real issue with this boss lies in his ad spawning mechanics. When you pull the boss, he spawns 4 non-elite basilisks, which can easily be taken down with some AoE. But as you continue to fight him, he will spawn more and more elite basilisks periodically. This can be an issue if your group either has poor DPS, making the basilisk build up quickly and overwhelm your party, or if your group is uncoordinated on whether to focus the boss or the ads first, which makes it to where nothing dies and the fight spirals out of control. When you do fight this guy, you can either focus the boss, then the ads, or you focus the ads as they spawn, then the boss, with both of these strategies being viable but requiring full coordination. If your party is divided, and your party's DPS is lackluster, nothing will die and you will easily be overwhelmed. Another small issue with the ads is maintaining threat as a tank and keeping them off your healer, but luckily their damage is not unmanageable. In sum, this boss can go wrong pretty quickly, and the lack of coordination common in random groups makes it somewhat dicey. Now at number 5, I have chosen Princess Theradras from Maraudon. The princess has a lot of scary abilities and is probably one of the first hard high-level fights players will encounter as they're leveling. The first mechanic the princess has is a boulder she throws, which is pretty negligible. Then she has an AoE fear, which if combined with other mechanics can cause a sticky situation, so fear ward or tremor totems are recommended. Then her most dangerous ability is the dust field, which is a pulsing AoE around her that does pretty good damage and knocks you back, so melee need to be careful. More importantly though, this ability drops all threat, and since melee will not be near her, will likely cause the princess to aggro on a ranged DPS or healer. This, combined with her hitting pretty hard and her thrash ability, makes it to where she can easily one-shot squishy characters, so the tank needs to be ready to pick up aggro. One last thing for this fight is that Princess has a ton of health and can make the fight pretty sketchy when it comes to mana on the healer, so mana pots should probably be at the ready. Pretty much, the Princess is no joke when it comes to her mechanics and can be very dangerous for healers or caster DPS, so caution is advised. And next up, we have Verdan the Everliving, the second to last boss of the Wailing Caverns and the lowest level boss on this list. This guy is very simple due to how early in the game he is, but is notorious for the absurd amount of damage that he does for this level. This guy hits like an absolute truck and can 2 or 3 shot tanks with gear that can even be pretty good for this level. This guy needs the healer to be paying full attention to healing the tank, and pre-casting heals almost non-stop whilst the tank has healing potions at the ready. Additionally, this guy has a pretty large health pool, so sometimes if your healer isn't efficient, they can run out of mana before the end of the fight, which will almost certainly get your tank killed. The only actual ability this guy has is a 10-second route to nearby players, which can be really bad if your tank needs to run to not die. If your healer is smart with their mana and paying full attention, the boss is pretty much a tank and spank, but Verdan is notorious for being the downfall of new players and is the hardest early game dungeon boss in the game. Now onto the top 3 with our third place, we have Emperor Thaurissan, the last boss of the Blackrock Depths and the king of the Dark Iron Dwarves. This guy is quite scary to take on, even for max level players, and this is for a multitude of reasons. First thing to note is the Princess Moira Bronzebeard who accompanies the Emperor. She can either be killed or saved for an alliance quest, If you intend to save her, she needs to be interrupted and off-tanked while you focus on the Emperor, but if you kill her, she needs to be killed while the Emperor is on low health to minimize his enrage. The Princess has healing abilities and shadow damage abilities. The Emperor is the real danger of this fight, because he hits very hard and has two scary abilities. First is his 5-second stun, which if done to the tank can cause threat issues. The worst of the two abilities though is his enrage, which makes him immune to spells while doing extra damage on his attacks. This enrage happens periodically, but happens more often if you kill the princess during his fight. The spell immunity also makes the fight even longer than it already is with his giant health pool. A pretty common occurrence in this fight is the tank taking an absurd amount of damage, running the healer's or the tank getting stunned and the rest of the group pulling threat and getting two-shot. Next, at the second spot, and the second hardest dungeon boss for hardcore in my opinion, is General Drakkisath, the last boss of Upper Blackrock Spire. This guy can be very tricky to take down for a few reasons, but the common strategies for him will usually minimize the risk. General Drakkisath has two chromatic elite guards that accompany him and can be quite scary on their own merit, so most often the strategy is for a mage or hunter to pull and kite the general to the beast room and then drop threat with ice block or feign death so he runs back. While this is happening, the rest of the group will kill the adds without worrying about the boss, but if the group has low DPS, they may not be able to, which can be very scary. For the general himself, he has a few very dangerous abilities. First, he has a cleave and a fire breath that do a lot of damage, so the tank needs to face him away from the group. Next, he has a thunderclap, which will slow down nearby players and slow their attack speed, which can mess with threat if it is an issue. He also has a flame strike that will do decent damage if you stand in it, so you need to watch where your character is. Lastly, his most dangerous ability is Conflagration, which will do 3,000 fire damage over 10 seconds and stun whoever is highest on threat while they pulse fire damage around them. Additionally, this stun will drop threat, so the second tank needs to be ready to pick up the general because he does a ton of damage and will one-shot most players. This threat drop combined with the huge amount of damage done by the frontals and Conflagration make it very dicey. This threat drop, combined with the huge amount of damage done by the frontals and Conflagration, make it a very dicey encounter, with a high chance of healers running out of mana that often ends in random, unexpected deaths out of nowhere. Now, the final boss for this list, and what I think is the most dangerous dungeon boss in all of WoW Classic Hardcore, is the Shade of Eranikus, the last boss of the Sunken Temple. This boss is extremely scary for a 5-man group, and I have seen more go wrong and more close calls on this boss compared to every other dungeon boss in the game. The primary reason this fight is scary is for his ability Deep Slumber, which he will periodically cast on the person with the highest threat, incapacitating them for 15 seconds and dropping their threat. When this goes off, usually on the tank, it can be very bad, especially without an off-tank or hunter pet, since the boss will attack the rest of the party and will do a crazy amount of damage, almost two-shotting most classes. Players need to be ready to run, lip, or do anything at their disposal if he goes to attack you, since he can easily kill most players. Additionally, if you do try to run from him, he does have a thrash ability, which can stack up and one-shot you if you run for too long. Overall, this single stun and threat drop is very hard to manage, since it is so long and since you are in a 5-man group, so odds are you won't have a second warrior to tank for you. This threat is further exemplified by the giant health pool of the boss and the 5-second stun he has as well. This, in my opinion, is by far the scariest boss in the game, and if it were seen by more players earlier on, it would undoubtedly compile a massive list of casualties. One final thing for this boss is that if you start fighting him without clearing all of the dragons in the dungeon, then they will start running to the boss room when the fight starts, which will pretty much guarantee at least a few people dying, and some wipes happen because groups don't know this, and then they start the boss. And those were what I believe to be the 10 deadliest dungeon bosses in WoW Classic Hardcore. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. If there are any changes to the list you would make, let me know in the comments below. With that being said, I'm out.